everyone, and welcome to AustCham Thailand TV Business Connections Community, an online program where we keep you updated on what's happening in the business community here. I'm your host, Brendan Cunningham, Executive Director at AustCham Thailand. Coming up in today's episode, we're going to provide a legal update and, importantly, opportunities for businesses in Thailand. We continue our health theme with some very great news for expats living in Thailand and the introduction of a GP system, which we certainly miss from Australia. And finally, we welcome an institution here in Thailand, the women's group, Australia-New Zealand Women's Group, ANZWG. Stay with us. Welcome back. In our business section today, we welcome Dr. Paul Crosio, partner at AustCham Gold sponsor, Silk Legal. Paul is going to provide some legal updates and opportunities for businesses here in Thailand. Paul, how are you?
Good, thanks Brendan, and thanks for having me today.
Always a pleasure.
Good.
So Paul, there's some interesting things that have been happening over the last couple of weeks, couple of months, so a highly topical and relevant time to have you here with us. I'd like to start with, if you could provide just some brief updates on immigration status for expats in the community, and I know this is important to our audience.
Sure. The Thai government's really focusing on bringing back high net worth individuals into Thailand, as well as making it easier for digital nomads to live here. So they've gone on a program which they've taken two tracks. We've all heard about the 10-year visa. They've had that for some time, but it hasn't been a popular program. It was restricted to a few countries. It required a large upfront payment, and it was particularly aimed at retirees. So that program had been looked at, and the government has thought about how we're going to attract high net worth individuals. So they're doing this by a couple of means. Previously, the idea was to have a Smart S visa for the digital nomads. That went in a couple of years ago, and we've had people who've applied for it successfully, but it does have some wrinkles. What they're doing now is providing two avenues to get semi-permanent residence in Thailand, as well as the ability to work as needed. Right. Now, the first one is a popular one, which is the Thai Elite visa. For many people, they've got a Thai Elite visa, or they're using a Thai Elite visa, but they've got to remember the Thai Elite visa is a tourist visa. So you're living in Thailand through an extended tourist visa. Now, the issue is that if people want to work in Thailand, this wasn't the right visa. You basically have to go and cancel it and then apply for a visa that allow you to get a work permit. So Thai Elite have, with the government, developed a program where at their higher levels you can apply for a work permit, and basically their visa becomes a gateway to getting a work permit. A lot of people think that this is a work permit. It's not. You have two parts. You have the residential requirements, and then you have the work requirement. So the Thai Elite visa package now at their higher level allows you to meet the residential requirements, but you still need a sponsor to be able to get that work permit. Now, it's not cheap by any means. You're required to be a high net worth individual and show you've invested approximately $1 million into Thailand. Right. Looking at the property prices around Bangkok and Phuket, that's probably an easy thing to do. But for many of us with lesser means, this is an expensive way to get a work permit.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
It's not for everyone, we can certainly say that.
Certainly not for everyone. The other way they've looked at it is to provide a means for digital nomads to enter the country through an extended visa. And this one again is a 10-year visa. And you're required to show a reasonable amount of savings in the bank, as well as having a reasonable income, proof of a reasonable income. So they're talking about around about $80,000 a year in income, half that if you're a retiree, and having about $500,000 in bonds or real estate or some other means. Again, not a cheap alternative, but probably more doable for many of the crypto warriors we see using Thailand as their base. Both elite and this other alternate visas, extended visa, are good options for people who are using Thailand as their base and want to develop a business here or want to work in a business here. One of the things that people seem to forget about Thailand is the definition of work.
Right.
So basically signing a document as a director of a company in Thailand is work.
Right.
So you've got to be very careful that even a very passive employment program could move you into that category of working in Thailand. Now the other issue for Australians here is a lot of changes on what we see as income from the Australian taxman's point of view. So suddenly you've got a business in Thailand, you're being paid in Thailand, and you may have been out of Australia for decades. Well, the Australian government's going through a program where they're putting into place tests that even if you're in Australia for a couple of months, you may be taxable in Australia. They call this the bright line test, and it says that if you've got family in Australia, you've got an investment property in Australia, and you've got a connection to Australia, and a passport's a connection to Australia, you may be taxable in Australia.
Right.
So you've got the dilemma of, yeah, I've got a work permit, and now I've got a tax bill in Australia and Thailand to deal with. There is a double tax treaty,
yes,
but there's no guesses that the Australian taxman wants first cut of that cake,
right,
and then you can claim it back under the Thai laws.
So,
But
yeah, so essentially you need to pay tax somewhere, and you need to be careful of the fact you may have to pay tax in more than one place if you really need to be across those laws.
Yes, we did an article for this in the Phuket News where we showed that there are a number of issues, and not just the tax issues, it's the way that tax in Australia treats the primary residents and the way capital gains can be triggered by you becoming a deemed non-resident or a resident.
Right.
So a lot of tricky areas to watch out for.
Stay on top of it, basically.
Stay on top
Another
of it, pretty
question
much.
on, because you mentioned about the intricacies of even if you sign a document, you're technically working. I know, and maybe I'm not updated on it, but there's also where you can work in Thailand. So if I have a work permit to work in one place, am I able to work in other places? So what about for the very notion of a nomad? Can the nomad be a nomad, is my question.
It used to be very restrictive. At the present time, they've relaxed that, and if you work in Bangkok, and for instance, you've got businesses in Phuket or in Chiang Mai, then that's perfectly okay under the work visa. So they've got around those restrictions. It just wasn't workable.
Right.
The digital nomad is a person who generates income that's sourced in Thailand or paid in Thailand. So no matter where you live, you're going to be taxable. But your point being, if I want to get the work permit in Bangkok and I decide I really want to live in Phuket or Koh Samui, do I need to get another work permit?
Right.
Generally, no.
Okay, well that's good to hear, yeah. And so another highly interesting topic for our members is around the 60-day Covet Extensions. Not so much for our members, but there's obviously a lot of travelling spouses, etc., with the members in the greater audience. So what's happening there?
Well, the government's been very generous that they've extended these automatic rolling 60-day extensions. And they've come out and said basically they're going to stop that at the end of March. So get in and get your extension if you're able to, but at the end of March it's going to stop.
Right.
You've got a bit of a dilemma because the traditional border runs
Right.
are not going to be possible. Unlikely that Laos or Cambodia is going to open up in the near future. So people are then stuck with what are they going to do. In many cases they're going to need to return overseas somehow and then re-enter Thailand, but through an expensive way. Either you're going to have to fly to a neighbouring country and return, or figure some other way to extend that visa, or convert it to a longer term visa. The problem with the COVID visas that we've found is that the COVID visas are not a gateway that the immigration allows you to go into a resident visa where you can extend it infinitely through work permits, etc. So you've got to be careful, and we've had cases where some immigration and particularly some immigration officers said yes you can,
Right.
and some have said no you can't.
Right.
So it's a grey area.
Okay. So definitely something we need clarification on. But if they, so with the 60-day extensions stopping, are 30-day extensions still again an option, or it's just the only option is you need to go over the border?
They're really starting to clamp down on those multiple 30 days. They're going to see in your passport, and they've been doing it more and more before COVID, but COVID hit and they stopped doing it. They're going to see a passport full of border runs or 30-day extensions, right, and they're going to say no more. So really, you're at the discretion of the immigration officer. Some areas are much more flexible than others. The Chonburi area is notably flexible, right, and some areas, for example, in Phuket or Koh Samui, are less flexible.
Okay. It's going to make things tough, as you would know. Some people would be planning trips abroad during the Songkran/Easter period, but that's not an option for everyone. There's a lot of people with kids in international schools, for example, who are planning their international trips for June, July, as they do every year. So it will be interesting to see how that works out for the membership base and stay across it.
Sure, and there's risk involved as well. I mean, people going to these other countries, Australia, UK, whatever, we've got many friends, and personally the same, where they've gone to these countries and caught COVID, or right, come back and passed the first test, and on the 5th-day test, they've been positive, and it's come through. And it's a tremendous financial burden, right, because you're basically locked away for a number of days, and you're at the, in a hospital or in a hotel, and the bills can mount up considerably, especially with a family.
Well, the government, of course, has touted removing the 5th day, so fingers crossed we hear some good news there.
Yes.
Very soon. Let's change pace a little. So, Paul, you've been mentioned as a go-to expert in all things cannabis and hemp. Can you give us some information on the latest developments there? That's been an exciting sector, a lot of changes and a lot of developments for the last couple of years, so that's definitely something we want to be across.
Yeah, it's really part of the Thailand's direction of being a medical hub for Asia and being at the forefront of medical practices. My introduction to cannabis is, I think I was nominated because I've had 4 children going through university and probably had more exposure to the effects of it than most people, but that's fine. We've moved into a position where we've been one of the people and the firms preaching caution. There's a lot of hype about cannabis, and the government keeps talking about cannabis, but what they really mean is the cannabis plant. Yes. Be the cannabis indica or sativa, they don't mean as in the smoking, rolling variety of cannabis. So people are getting very excited. Liberalisation of cannabis, can we roll out cannabis a la the US or Canadian model, etc., etc. Well, Thailand's not the only country that's looking at this. There's about 50 countries that have medical cannabis programs in place. Thailand's one of them, but it certainly is one of the few in Asia. Yeah. And what they've done is said this, look, the hallucinogenic side of cannabis, THC side, heavily regulated. Still a narcotic. You're still going to spend a lot of time in jail. If you get caught with it, it's still a no-no. But CBD, we're okay with, because one, it fits the idea of traditional medicine, and it has been part of traditional medicine for a long period of time. And secondly, the byproducts of medical cannabis, better known as medical hemp, is more than just the CBD extracts and tinctures. It includes fibers and plant byproducts, which have got a tremendous amount of potential around the world. So when the people come to us, and we see a lot of people, and we want to develop a cannabis business, we've got to be particularly careful. Right. And there's a couple of things that the government's done. It said this is a high income, high profit crop for the impoverished northeast in the north of Thailand, because it grows in suboptimal conditions. So firstly, we're going to maintain a tight control on the growth of cannabis in Thailand. So they've put limitations on foreign ownership or foreign directorship in companies that are involved in cannabis for that reason. Secondly, we are going to follow the worldwide trend, and basically cannabis has been rescheduled under the UN Acts, the Uniform Act on Narcotics particularly, where it's been removed from being in the highest category, but it's still a categorized drug. Right. And the US and most countries have said, yes, we recognize there's medicinal purposes for the growth of cannabis, but the other uses of cannabis are still strictly prohibited.
Right.
So that's gone through. So we have a nascent industry here around medical cannabis and plant fibre and that. So people coming in need to build a model that's going to be able to be sustainable, not by the sale of THC, but by the sale of the CBD and the natural products.
Right.
The cannabis cafes you see growing up around the place, whether in Pattaya or Phuket or in Bangkok, are basically selling you a natural product which is CBD.
Right.
And of various levels of purity. But it is a trendy, and it will be continuing to be trendy to have a cannabis cafe. And there are undoubtable medical benefits coming from it. So it's good for Thailand, it's good for the economy. It's not an area where foreigners are going to find an easy entry.
Right.
So you need some good advice and good structuring on how to do that.
What is that advice? If someone did want to make money off it, what's a very simple advice you can give?
Simple advice is think about your structure, think about your partner, and you're going to need a Thai partner of some sort, and talk to people and understand the horror stories as well as the success stories.
Right.
There's much to be learned on why it went wrong as why it was successful. And there are a number of successful people. And the other thing, if you want to make a small fortune in cannabis, start with a big fortune.
Right.
And that's the truism. It's a long-term project for many people.
Absolutely. Can we move on to talk about crypto? Because Silk Legal is also very well known as experts in the crypto space. So can you give us some insights into crypto trends both here and abroad?
Sure. Crypto's always been a hot topic. It has been for us for the last 2 years, and it's a large part of our business, as you know, and we advise many offshore companies in the crypto field. Part of it is that crypto and cryptocurrencies and the various technologies are being legitimized. We're seeing that the block coin, the Ethereums, are trending and following trends that you see in the stock markets, economic indicators, which tells you as an economist that they've got a legitimate foundation. You've got two people who are playing in the crypto space, those who believe it's a total gamble, and this is great, and they're really into it for that reason, and those who see it as a legitimate investment vehicle. And some of the stable coins or crypto coins that have been pushed and sold at the moment are in that category of legitimate investment vehicles. On the other side, we're seeing the non-fungible tokens, those where you've got pixelated images and that. They're pretty hard to understand from a professional point of view because they're basically providing you nothing. But what's happening is these NFTs are becoming associated and packaged with other things. So when you receive a token, you have with that token stable coin or other types of coins, and it's simply using the NFT as a transmission method. And that's something that's happened. Of course, the other thing with crypto is, as it's getting legitimized, it's also getting regulated.
Yes.
So the Thai government came out late last year, early this year, and says, this is revenue, you make a profit on a sale, you're going to pay tax. And that created a almighty uproar in the community amongst not only financial institutions, but also amongst people saying that Thailand was becoming unfriendly to digital. So they backed away from that, and they've opened up a public discussion which ends this month on what they're going to do to regulate cryptocurrencies. So the regulation is going to be in place. In Europe, they do have regulatory regime which states that you need to be able to trace currencies, and they're very conscious of the fact that crypto by its very nature is a hidden transaction of some form or fashion, and they want to be able to ensure that it's used for legitimate purposes. So there's regulations that are happening there, but the EU, as an example, is saying that we are embracing it, and we do want to go there on the proper basis. So we're seeing those trends. We're also seeing trends where the gas required to drive these transactions is being drastically reduced. There's an efficiency that's been put into the system where people can be involved at lesser cost and maintain their portfolio at lesser cost. So this is some things that come about. We're also finding that environment and regulatory areas change. Some of the countries that were traditionally crypto-friendly, where you would have an exchange or you would have back offices, have now changed. And so people need to be very much aware of what's happening in these countries whether they're in Eastern Europe, whether they're being in the Caribbean, or whether they're being in Thailand. Just exactly what's happening with the changes.
Okay. What would you advise, because there are crypto investors, there are a lot of people sitting on the fence who I think either don't understand it enough, don't understand it at all, or I guess do understand it and aren't sold on the idea. If we focus more on the people who sit on the fence who don't really understand it, what advice would you give to them?
I give them the same advice as dabbling in the stock market. Have a balanced portfolio. You've got coins which definitely are popular, Bitcoin, and you've got coins and NFTs which are trendy, Dodge, etc. So with a balanced portfolio and a loss program that says, look, if it drops by X and I can't afford it, I should be out of there, or if it increases, how I'm going to reinvest my profits, then I think people can benefit from it, make a good upside from it. But it's the same as the stock market. There's volatility, and you've got to accept that there is volatility in the system.
Very good. So, Paul, are we seeing some exciting opportunities for businesses, business people across these new sectors over this year?
Look, I think Thailand's in a great position. I mean, the government is responsive to the ideas of new avenues. The tradition of tourism being the backbone of the Thai economy, I think, has taken a battering. So they're looking at digital, and they're looking at services as being an area of focus. It's not saying tourism will go away, but we know that it will take a lesser place. So just as things grow, there's opportunities. There's many opportunities to invest in businesses that need assistance and help. And there's many opportunities to bring into Thailand new businesses, which we're seeing every day of the week.
Good. Paul, thank you very much for the updates.
Thanks a lot.
Always a pleasure, and I always learn something new when I'm speaking with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And don't forget, we have a bi-monthly column in the Phuket News,
yes,
which is variously named Legal Matters or the Aussie Abroad,
right,
which I hope people have a look at.
Keep an eye on that. Go to the Phuket News and follow Dr. Paul Crosio and the legal updates in the Phuket News bi-monthly.
Thank you.
And I'll see you down there soon as well.
I certainly will.
Great. Dr. Paul Crosio, partner at Silk Legal. Coming up next, our connection section, and we welcome our good friends at the Bangkok Hospital. Stay with us. And welcome back. In today's connection section, we're very honoured to be joined by our gold sponsor, Bangkok Hospital. Today we have with us Dr. Asawin Puwatanasan, better known as Dr. Pete, Assistant Hospital Director at Bangkok International Hospital, and Dr. Pojnicha Mekaroonkamol, better known as Dr. J, Attending Physician at the Integrated Care Centre at Bangkok International Hospital. A couple of long titles for a couple of very accomplished doctors. Dr. J and Dr. Pete, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you for having us here today.
Thanks for coming along. Great, so we're here today to talk about specifically expat health. A lot of us, whether you've lived here 22 years like myself, or you've just arrived in Thailand to start a new career, staying healthy is very important for us, and finding the right options in Thailand even more important. So I'd like to start by talking about your expat care centre. And can you give us a rundown on what the care centre is?
Sure.
Okay, well.
Yeah, so the Expat Care Centre is, a new service that the hospital provide to the expat patients. We started off with the idea that, we like to have a group of primary care physicians to look after our customers from holistic point of view. When we say primary care physicians, we mean like general practitioner in Australia.
So your local GP.
Yeah,
what we'd also call a family doctor.
Exactly, like what we have in Australia, that we have general practitioners working in the GP surgery, and you can call them my doctor. You know, when you go anywhere, you just mention, well, you know, I have my doctors told me this and that, and this is the, you know, the summary from my doctor, like that. So the difference would be our doctors at integrated care centres, all of them are internal medicine trained, or in Australia is general medicine trained, where they will, you know, they're trained to look after general medicine patients. However, we also have connection with pediatricians that we can, you know, sort of contact the pediatrician to help looking after the, you know, your children at home as well. So we like our doctors to be more like doctor family members of the patients.
Right.
Like that.
So it's very important. I know I can speak on behalf of our members here, particularly if they're just arriving in Thailand. I'll go a step further and say, especially with the family, that's one of their top 3 priorities. Finding a place to live, obviously, other things, schools, and knowing that they've got a good GP that they can access when the time comes. Hopefully it doesn't, but when the time comes. So it's a great idea, and we obviously have it in Australia, but how did it come about in the Bangkok hospital? What initiated it?
Well, it started off when we established the Bangkok International Hospital a few years ago. We established the Integrated Care Center. That's how we started. We want this place to be a center for primary care for people, actually for general people, both Thai and foreigners. We realized that in Thailand we don't have the system of primary care. It's not as well known as, you know, especially for people who came from other countries. They may be looking for, like, oh, who's going to be my primary care doctor? Who's going to be my the person that I go to when I have any issues, or even when I want a health checkup. So after we ran this service, we found out that this is the foreigners in Thailand are in such need for this kind of service, and that's why we try to initiate this for expat as well.
Absolutely, and I like the way you've both referred to on more than one occasion. It's that concept of my doctor, because they really do, once again, particularly if either you have a family, kids, or you have special needs in health, the my doctor really does become part of your family, a very important part of your family as well. So it's quite, the hospital has been open for a few years and we're introducing this service. Could you provide us a snapshot of the patient journey of walking into Bangkok International Hospital in this new expat care centre?
Well, this place that we want it to be like I mentioned, the primary care service place. So instead of when you come to the hospital, you are triaged by a staff at the reception. When you tell them, hey, this is my problem, and they navigate you to cardiology clinic or surgery clinic, then you can come to us, and we are going to be the one who advise or give you recommendation on whom you need to see, or who else going to be involved in solving your problems. And we have the case manager and, you know, other health allies that can also assist in this journey as well.
So at the Expat Care Center, we have our own expat care coordinator and a case management nurse, or we call case manager, to help assisting in making appointment to see a doctor, or you can even walk in to see one of our doctors at the Expat Care Center. And the center itself is located at Bangkok International Hospital, which is the newest, the youngest hospital at Bangkok Hospital Headquarters. You're probably aware that, you know, at Bangkok Hospital Headquarters we have many hospitals located in the same campus, and Bangkok International Hospital is the youngest one. Yeah, just opened about 3 years ago. And you know, once you make contact with with our coordinator or or you can contact the hospital directly, make an appointment, come to see the doctor. The doctor will assess you first, like what the general practitioners in Australia would do, and then see whether you need to be seen by other specialists or not. Like if you have 3 or 4 problems with different organs that require specialist consultation, then our doctor will coordinate with other specialists, and then arrange an appointment for you. It can be either if the specialists are convenient enough to come to the center, the specialist can come to see you at the center. You don't have to, walk around 4 to 5 different hospitals in the headquarters. Okay.
So, me as a patient, is it a case where if I have a runny nose and feel like I have I'll say the flu, or I've been running and I feel like I've done something serious to my knee, I go straight to the Expat Care Centre, regardless of what I perceive as the seriousness of the injury, as the first point of call. And then from there, I'm managed from there in terms of what treatment is needed.
Exactly.
Correct.
And we also want to be available, like, it doesn't have to always be like in person. For example, I meet you before, you're now my patient, you have a problem, but you're not sure what to do, you can call us or send us an email, and we'll help you, like, remotely. Like, okay, I think this is fine, you don't have to come to the hospital, just take some paracetamol, get some rest, or I think this is serious and you have to come in to see us.
So once I have my GP, so to speak, I'll use the 2 examples. If I have a runny nose, I might think, I'll see how I feel, I'll go see you tomorrow. I won't bother you on the weekend, for example. But if I'm out jogging and I hurt my knee and it swells up, I can take a photo and say, how does this look? Should I come today or can I wait till Monday?
Exactly. I think that's the whole point of having a personal doctor that knows you,
Yeah. And like we said, becoming part of the family. So it might not be me, it might be my son or daughter. Something's happened and how serious is this? Do we come now?
And one unique thing about our expat care centres, primary care physicians, is that they work as a team. So no one can, work every day, 24/7. That's impossible. So our doctors, all of them, they work as one team. So, let's say if Dr. J looked after you in the previous, presentation to the hospital, and then you got to see again today, you want to come to see her again. She might not be available, she might be on leave, or she might be with her family on that day. She would hand over thoroughly to her colleague, and all the documentations that she recorded in the system would be complete as well, so that her colleague can have a look through and then pick up straight away what happened to you from the previous visit, and then that doctor can help looking after you as well. So we work as a team. So there's no such thing as Dr. J is available 24/7, 365 days a year.
Impossible.
That's impossible. Yeah. So it will be like that. As some of you may be aware that the system in private hospitals in Thailand are mostly a specialist-based system. So when you have sore throat, you come to the hospital, they might just assess you and say, okay, you have to go to see ENT specialists like that straight away. So most of the private hospitals wouldn't provide this kind of general practitioner service. But we think that having primary care physician, a group of primary care physicians would help in the way that they can be the center person that can help coordinating between different specialists for the patient. So they kind of know you the whole lot, rather than only know about your heart or know about your gastrointestinal tract or know about your brain. But this doctor will be the one that will sort of, be aware of your medical conditions as a whole. Yeah.
I agree, and I'm sure our members, not only the ones here, but the ones who are arriving new to Thailand, who are used to that general practitioner having my doctor back in Australia, I think knowing that that option is here when they first arrive in Thailand, like I said, that'll be schools, accommodation, and making sure you have a good doctor for the family, the top 3 things that the expat arrival will do. So we're just going to flash up on the screen here the website for the Expat Care Centre, or of course you can contact the AustCham office and we can put you in contact with the Bangkok Hospital anytime as well. So any final thoughts before we switch off?
I'd like to add on, so not only that we're available for sick visit, but of course, you want to come in and establish care with us. We also provide like health maintenance, like annual checkup, vaccination, and other stuff that healthy people might need as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point to close on, because I think the past 2 years have taught us that waiting till you're sick and getting fixed is no longer the best option. Well, it was never the best option, but people are much more aware to be on top of their health than they were certainly 2 years ago. So definitely drop in and see the Expat Care Centre and make sure you're staying one step ahead in maintaining your health. Great. Well, Dr. Pete, Dr. Jay, thank you so much for joining us again. And we look forward to visiting you at the Expat Care Centre.
Look forward to that. Okay. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you. Coming up next, our community section, and we welcome one of our strategic partners in the Australian Thai community. Stay with us.
เลิกได้อารมณ์ร้อนเพราะบ้านร้อนใช้หลังคาเมทัลชีทบลูสโคปแซกคูลเพราะคูลโคตติ้งเทคโนโลยีที่อัปเกรดขึ้นอีกขั้นช่วยให้บ้านเย็นขึ้น4องศาเย็นเลือกหลังคาเมทัลชีทบลูสโคปแซกคูล
And welcome back. In our community section today, we welcome one of AustCham's longest, in fact longer than AustCham, collaborator, strategic partner, and a very important part of the Australian Thai community. We welcome May Lawrence from the ANZWG Welfare Committee. May, how are you?
I'm great, thank you, Brendan. Thank you so much for having us on your program.
It's a pleasure. May, in preparation for this interview, I went back and looked at when ANZWG was established, and this is the 68th year for ANZWG. That's incredible.
It is, isn't it? She's a real grande dame, yes. We were formed in 1954.
Right.
That's a long way back, isn't it?
It certainly is. And well, let's look back at 68 years ago. Can you tell us a bit? For most of our audience, I think will know who ANZWG is, yes, but just a little bit about the history and what ANZWG is.
Yes, we were established way back in 1954, and at that time we were known as the Australian Women's Group. It was mainly a social support group that had a focus on welfare. The New Zealand ladies then came along, and they also grew in numbers, and they joined Australian Women's Group, and it became ANZWG, Australian New Zealand Women's Group. Then in 1955, the first Australian ambassador was appointed to Thailand, and his wife, Mrs. Alison Hay, became the first chairperson for ANZWG.
Right.
She remained as chair for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Very dedicated.
Yes.
And it was only in 1975, 20 years later, a president was elected, and Mrs. Hay became the patron of ANZWG.
Right.
Then in 1958, more and more New Zealand expats arrived in Thailand, and they decided to form their own New Zealand group. Right. So they sort of split away from us. Mm-hmm. They formed their own group, and we became Australian Women's Group again. Right. Then it was not until 1983 that the two women's groups decided to merge, and we became one ANZWG.
Okay. It didn't have anything to do with the underarm incident in cricket, did it?
I hope not.
That still haunts our good friends in New Zealand across the Tasman. Well, that's really interesting. So ANZWG are a very active community group, as we all know. Can you give us some insights into the activities you do?
Sure. Our activities can be classified into two main categories, if you like. One being welfare, which is what it started out initially as a focus. And the other one is more like a social category. So I'll start with the welfare part. We've been doing a lot of welfare work. We've supported a lot of organizations, and our focus has been around women and supporting children's education. Throughout the years, we have supported many major institutions and organizations. Just to name some, there are, for example, the Good Shepherd Sisters in Dindang and Nong Khai. There's also Dwang Pratit Foundation. There's Mercy House Orphanage in Hua Hin. There's the Diocean Brothers, and Diocean Brothers has various education centers around the countryside and up north and down south in Thailand. There's also Presentation Slums Mission, which was started by an Australian nun, Sister Joan Evans, and this was going back. She was here for 25 years, and she only recently returned to Australia in 2017. But she was in the slums for 25 years, and she started what we still do today is the rice run and the milk run every Friday. Okay. And the other big organization that we support is the Hill Tribe Education Program, where we sponsor children to school in the hills. And we've also built a canteen for them, and we've built dormitories for children up there. So those are some of the major work projects that we've done in the past. The other side of it is, as I mentioned, it was more a social aspect. So there we create a community to help expat women, Australian and New Zealand women, to come together to form friendships and to bond and to support each other while they're here away from home. Yeah. And very often, when you a newcomer to a country that you've never been to before, there's so many things that you just don't know about, like where to get things, where do I find the right doctors, dentists, where my child is sick, where can I get a good pediatrician, right. And even things like where to find food, and right down to where can I get Vegemite. So there's a support group there for newcomers, and also as a newcomer, some of them also experience a bit of a culture shock. Yes. So say, for example, when I came to Thailand, I was surprised to find that I couldn't find a GP. I had to go to a hospital, and I thought, what? I can get a GP in Australia, why can't I find one here? But everything is different here. The way we do the things are done, who does it, and where you go, they're all different. And that can be quite a bit of a culture shock. Yes. So ANZWG is there as a support system to help these families transition. And to help them do that, we have newcomers morning tea. They come to our morning teas, and we have members. They meet, and they get to know, and they can find out as much as possible about what it's like living in Bangkok. Yes,
it's very important because even Australia's biggest cities don't really compare to the mayhem that can be Bangkok, yes, right? It is a big culture shock, and it's a very easy to navigate city. You do have everything you need here. And once you settle in, it's very hard often to go back home. It's such a great place to live.
I know what you mean.
But when you first arrive, it can be very daunting, as you say. And if the idea of finding a group who already has all the answers, and you could sit down with them and say, I need this, I need that, go here, talk to this person, it's fantastic. And it's quite interesting what you said about the GP. In our previous segment, in Connections, Bangkok Hospital have just launched Expat Care Centre. Oh, great. So we'll, of course, go back and watch that. But the whole idea is that we don't have GPs here. That's right. And Bangkok Hospital said, well, let's set up a centre where you do have GPs, because it's important, particularly the Australian and New Zealand expats.
Yes, yeah. yes, absolutely. Okay. And then the other group that we have, which is really important, is the Kiwa Group. And that's a play group for young children and for young mums to get together as well. And they have their social activities as well. So if you, anyone out there, Australia, New Zealand young mums, if you have young kids, the Kiwa Group is an excellent community to be part of. So
that's really important as well, because most expats coming from Australia and New Zealand, we come from houses. There's very few who live in condos, in apartments. And then we land in Bangkok, and the best option is often a very nice, comfortable, spacious condo, but it's still a condo, so being able to get out and find groups and playgrounds is also really important.
Absolutely, yes, and to get the children out of the condo, the apartments, and yeah, have the opportunity to actually mingle outside of their own household. And very often some of these activities are held outdoors as well, so the kids have an opportunity to play outdoors.
Mothers get a chance to...
to have a bit of a break as well. The only problem is it could be the heat. But yes, so I talked about the social aspect, and on a monthly basis, ANZWG organises monthly activities. So we have morning teas. We have activities. For example, we organise activities like whale watching, painting, walking around Bangkok city to explore, or it might be to do a bit of cultural thing, like to do some painting or watch an arts and crafts show or something like that. So we have that every month, and occasionally there'll be dinners, lunches, and after hours drinks, off and on. And then on an annual basis, we organise Mother's Day lunches, Christmas lunches, and a friendship lunch, which allows our members to invite their friends outside of ANZWG and other groups, for example, American Women's Group, or any of the friends who are not ANZWG members, to come and join us.
So like an all-welcome.
Yes, it's almost like an international women's lunch, really. So that's a really nice thing to do. The biggest event that we organise annually is the Melbourne Cup.
Right.
And that is really important for us because that's where we raised most of our funds to support all the organisations that I talked about before.
And you haven't been able to do that for at the large scale for a couple of years?
Yes, sadly, because of the pandemic restrictions, we haven't organised a Melbourne Cup at all for 2 years. But last year we were fortunate enough to hold a very small event, and we also had a lot of support from our former ANZWG members who have gone back to New Zealand and Australia. They have contributed a substantial amount of donations to us as well.
It's I was there, of course, at Sweet Poppies. It was a very nice event, and it was great that something could be held, even if it's wasn't on the large magnitude we're used to. So you mentioned that's how you do raise most of your money as well through the Melbourne Cup. So hoping that returns this year. It will obviously be run in Australia, but allowing it to return on a large scale here in Thailand, right?
Yes, let's hope so.
Great.
We would love to do it again, yes.
Good. Well, I know myself is a good example, and quite a lot of people I know coming from a horse racing background in Australia. It's certainly one of our favourite days as well, so I'll be looking forward to it again this year. A very important question for our AustCham audience. So, learning more about ANZWG here, how can the AustCham members who aren't already part of ANZWG get involved?
First of all, I would like to extend our invitation to AustCham members who are not part of ANZWG to join us as members. And it would be great to have as many people out, on board. There are also a lot of wider Australian communities out there who are not part of ANZWG, and that would be great too. We would love to have them join us as members. And the other, I guess, possibility we're thinking of is how do we collaborate with AustCham so that we can together organise another Melbourne Cup or a fundraising event like we have before. The critical thing for us at the moment is because of COVID, many expats have left to go back to Australia and New Zealand, and our membership base is not as strong as before. So this has impacted our ability to some extent to organise a big fundraising event. We would still truly want to keep our focus on welfare, and but we need help, and we do need some support, and we hope that we can get support like organisations like AustCham to get involved.
Good. And who are you targeting for your members, May?
We would target Australia, New Zealand expats who are here. Whether they've just arrived, or some of them I know have been here a long time. They, they know a lot about Thailand, and it would be wonderful to have them on board with us because they've got so much knowledge and experience that they could share with the newcomers to Thailand. To contribute, yes, yes. And they also have probably a wide network of people that can help us as well.
So we're just putting the ANZWG website up here on the screen. If you are interested in joining ANZWG, you can go to the URL here, or you can of course contact me or the AustCham team, and we can introduce you to May or the other committee at ANZWG.
Thank you, Brendan.
My pleasure. So as I mentioned, I'm certainly looking forward to the Melbourne Cup, but that's a long way away, so we'll certainly be working with you on a lot of things between now and then as well.
Thank you. We're looking forward to that as well. Thank you again for having us.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, May. May Lawrence, Welfare Committee for the Australia-New Zealand Women's Group, better known as ANZWG. And that's our episode for today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.